What do we want to talk about?
I am him. I am him.
Hey, this the Red Carpet Ring featuring TBK, the Turnbuckle King. We are here again, right here again with Ronda Rousey, Our Fight, a Memoir Book audio, 2024, the audiobook version of this book. Now, I know it's been a while, and almost a week since it's been here, but it's busy with WrestleMania week. As we finished with WrestleMania 40, which was a great event, if many of you don't know. And also, as stated, the record's best-selling event in company history. So like I said, now that WrestleMania 40 is in the books, let's get back to this with the audiobook. Now, we covered, it was into chapter 14 the last time I was here. But now we are going to start 14, the very beginning, and this will be the final part of the Ronda Rousey audiobook. It's been a very interesting book as far as Ronda Rousey, I believe, is entering motherhood for the very first time in her life. And also, she found out she was pregnant by her doctor, and also she will be trying to estimate how much time she had before after giving birth, to go back and train for the 2022 Royal Rumble, in which she did return to WWE after giving birth to her daughter. So definitely something to look into very shortly when we discuss this great audiobook. Brutally Honest Gilbert, salute to you. Thanks for coming out to the Red Carpet Ring as we cover this very final part of the audiobook. Now, this final part of the audiobook should be approximately a little over 2 hours. So it's not going to be 3 hours as the previous first part and the previous part of which was part 2. So part 1 and part 2 were about a little over 3 hours. This will be a little over 2. Her book is approximately 8 hours audiobook time. So it's not as long as the Becky Lynch audiobook, but still a good audiobook thus. And we are reaching near the end. I hope you guys enjoyed the audiobook. As I stated once before, I will do more audiobooks on here. Haven't decided which one exactly yet, but when I do, it will be here at the Red Carpet Ring. So with that being said, let's get into it. Let's talk about Ronda Rousey, Our Fight, a Memoir Book audio, 2024. The final part, the last separate chapters. So we are almost there, and I hope you guys enjoy, and I will have the audiobook up here shortly. Please bear with me.
My water broke on my due date, and as Trav and I drove to the hospital, I was adamant that it would be an unmedicated natural childbirth. It was evening when we arrived at the labor and delivery ward. It may be a little while, the nurse said, as she showed Trav how to recline the chair into a bed. After she had left the room, Trav turned to me. I'm going to get some sleep, he said. Tomorrow's going to be a big day. He smiled at me. I love you, he said. I love you too, I replied. He closed his eyes and drifted off. I stared at the ceiling in the dimly lit room, my contractions strengthening, each one providing a new, more intense answer to the question every pregnant woman asks herself about labor. How bad could it actually be? The pain soon escalated until it entered the definitely hurts worse than getting your finger chopped off zone. Trav adjusted his position in the recliner, trying to get comfortable in his sleep. I glared at him. I don't care how much you love your husband. There is a primal sense of the silent resentment and rage that overcomes a woman in labor as she watches her partner dreaming peacefully while she suffers through contractions. The sun was coming up when the nurse came in to check how labor was progressing. "Do you have a name picked out?" she asked as she moved toward the foot of the bed, pulling up the blanket to check how dilated I was. "Yes," I said. We hadn't so much as selected one as we constructed it over months of discussion with Trav's sisters and the guidance of their dreams. Trav is native Hawaiian. Hawaii holds a special place in our hearts. It's where we want to raise our hula dancing ninja babies, open a small dojo, get old, and eventually be buried together. When I'm there, I feel not only happy, but at peace. Shortly after my UFC loss to Holly Holm, when I was still hiding away from the world, Trav had taken me to one of the smaller islands. This was at a point in my life where just getting spotted sitting at In-N-Out in the drive-thru incited a mob of people to surround our car taking pictures like I was a mobile aquarium exhibit. "No one will bother you there," he promised. One afternoon, we were waiting for our food order at a local counter. A minivan stopped in the middle of the street, reversed, and pulled up next to us. I instinctively tensed. No idea what would emerge from this nondescript van. A whole family piled out. "Rhonda, Travis!" the dad called out. One by one, the parents and kids came over to give us hugs and kisses on the cheek. "Welcome home," the mom said. As they pulled away waving, I looked at Trav through welling tears. "I love it here," I said. In the Hawaiian culture, women on the men's side of the family name the babies. It's a collaborative deal, not "we picked this name, too bad if you hate it." As important as the name itself is the meaning behind it. Travis's older sisters, Maya and Yoni, named our boys Kaleo and Keave, and as soon as I was pregnant, we turned to them to name our daughter. "I think it should be Po," Maya said one day. It meant, she explained, darkness, but not a scary darkness. It meant darkness like the darkness that bore creation, like the darkness at the bottom of the ocean, like the darkness you need for there to be able to be light. "It just feels right," she said, and it did. She sent us a list of names that included Po and what they meant. There was one name on the list that we loved immediately, Lanipo, which meant a dark, verdant growth. It made me imagine a lush, dark gulch in a rainforest. It was perfect. A few weeks later, Maya called from Hawaii. "What do you think about including Makalapua?" she asked. It's Hawaiian for blossom. "That's really cute," I said. "Lanipo Makalapua." The only thing about that, Maya explained, was linguistically, it wouldn't make sense. The way you phrase it would have to be Makalapua Okalanipo. It was a beautiful name, but felt too long for a first name. "We can make that the middle name," she assured me. My face fell. I felt like we were being forced back to the drawing board. "Don't worry," Maya promised. "We'll find something perfect." She called us excited one morning. She had been sleeping on what the name should be, and it came to her in a dream. "La'akea," she said. It means a shining sacred light. There are different ways to interpret Hawaiian names, she explained. The meaning could even change throughout one's life. I had not yet seen my baby beyond the grainy images of the ultrasound, but when I closed my eyes, I visualized what it meant. This bright little flower growing up out of a dark rainforest gulch, rising upward toward the sky under a lush, dense canopy. I envisioned a single beam of light breaking through, finding its way through the vines and trees, shining on this tiny flower in the darkness. Even though she hadn't yet been born, my daughter was already the light of my life. It was perfect. Here's the thing about actually giving birth. For all the thinking about it and planning you do beforehand, you have no fucking clue what you're getting yourself into until you're sitting in the hospital, stuck at 3 centimeters after 12 hours of contractions and 24 plus hours without sleep. Plans change. And when plans change, epidurals are one of the greatest inventions of modern medicine. Eventually, it was time to push. After 2 miscarriages, a year of IVF, hundreds of hormone injections, dozens of doctor's visits, all 3 Lord of the Rings books, and part of the Silmarillion, a lesser-known prequel to the Lord of the Rings, 18 hours of contractions, and 4 good pushes, the doctor placed the most beautiful baby I had ever seen on my chest. Everything I had ever won, done, experienced, or accomplished paled in comparison. 15. 6 weeks after my sister Maria was born, my mom made weight and won the US Open. It was only after I had a baby that I realized how equally badass and borderline insane that was. I was not quite that ambitious. I would be stepping back into the WWE ring exactly 4 months from when I stepped out of the hospital. Motherhood was everything I imagined and more, but that didn't mean it wasn't also exhausting. I spent the first blurry days nursing and caring for, and sometimes just gazing at this tiny little person we had created. But as I started to come back to some state of awareness, I realized 4 months to get ready for a full WWE return would fly by. Returning for Royal Rumble made the most sense from a storytelling perspective. The winner of the Rumble gets to challenge for the title at WrestleMania. I had it all planned out. I would return and win the Royal Rumble as I sought to cement a legacy as one of the greatest heels in WWE history. Charlotte and I would meet one more time at Mania in the spring. I wasn't 100% physically back from having the baby, and if anyone could carry my postpartum ass, it was Charlotte. As soon as I put away any questions about her ability to beat me once and for all, I would set my sights on Becky. The build-up between the two of us would be epic, and everything the fans wanted to see. It would culminate in not only the greatest women's match in history, but as one of the greatest WrestleMania matches ever. Beside facing Charlotte and Becky, I wanted to tag team with Shaina. Wrestling at the highest level with her was one of the main reasons I got into the business in the first place. In true pro wrestling style, Shaina would inevitably turn on me. That would set us up for a historic showdown at SummerSlam, the second biggest event of the year, where she would win and I would walk off into the sunset. I wanted the singles match between Becky and me to be something special, the kind of matchup that wouldn't just captivate wrestling fans, but create new ones. I was inspired by Roddy Piper's Hollywood Backlot Brawl at WrestleMania 12. In that showdown, Roddy and Goldust battled back and forth in a pre-recorded but meant to look alive, behind-the-scenes battle that eventually spilled out into the ring where they faced off in WrestleMania. Instead of playing a package, the standard highlight reel summary of a feud to catch viewers up to speed before a match, Becky and I could have a backstage brawl interspersed throughout the WrestleMania card. Each clip of the brawl would be more intense than the previous, driven by dialogue recapping our rivalry for new fans. By the time we reached our advertised slot in the show, we'd have been fighting for the better part of the night. Bad Reputation would blare, but no one would come out. The announcers would ask each other if there would even be a match. Then Becky's music would hit, a few bars more, and still no one. The audience, whether watching on the Jumbotron or at home, would start to wonder what was going on. And that's when she would throw my ass through the curtain, beating me with a chair all the way down the ramp and into the ring. It was dramatic and would require high-level production to do it right. But the catchphrase for the event in LA was, WrestleMania goes Hollywood. I was brimming with ideas and just wanted to get the conversation started. I wanted this to be something that was so great you could tell it came from years of thought from the best minds in the business. And that's why I wanted to meet with you now. I concluded. Triple H, Vince McMahon, and Paul Heyman sat in suits around the conference table at WWE headquarters in Connecticut, nodding excitedly as I laid out the entire plan. By the end, we were finishing each other's sentences. Fucking love it, Vince said. That's all I needed to hear. That was what motivated me as I dragged myself out of bed, half asleep, hair unbrushed, milk leaking from my boobs, back to training. It had been 2.5 years since I truly worked out. Contrary to what one might expect, working out isn't something I am particularly motivated to do. Yes, if you happen to come to our house at 5 a.m., you will see someone working out hard in the gym we converted our garage into, but it would be my husband. I will be upstairs, asleep, in my bed. My entire adult life, working out was a major part of my job responsibilities, but no one had been paying me for it since I left WWE, and I had no interest in working for free. When I have downtime, I very much enjoy doing nothing. Not only had I not been working out, but my body had changed. I knew I wouldn't be able to bounce back into shape the way I used to because I could no longer train the way I used to. I couldn't dehydrate or crash diet my way back into shape. I was breastfeeding and had to keep eating regularly to make sure that Poe was getting enough nutrition. I found that for the first time in my life, I had anxiety about returning not just to function, but also to form. I had little doubt that, from an athletic standpoint, I would be ready to get back in the ring within 4 months. Getting back into a sports bra and midriff bearing spandex shorts within 4 months was another story. The idea of being directly compared to how I looked before I had a baby was far more daunting than the idea of storming into an arena in front of 45,000 people and throwing a bunch of chicks around the ring. But I felt like I had something to prove, and for the first time in a long time, the person I was looking to prove something to was myself. In the almost 3 years that I had been away, I felt like I had lost my athletic self. More than losing the baby weight, I wanted to make sure that I hadn't completely lost who I was. The doctor told me I had to wait 6 weeks before working out to avoid hemorrhaging, meaning I effectively only had 2.5 months to get back in shape after years of letting my body turn to mush. My first time back working out, I stepped in the ring and did a forward roll. It's the first thing I learned in judo, and I'd been doing it since I was almost 11. I felt like I was about to throw my back out. I had trouble lifting 5-pound weights. I was shocked at my regression. I was literally starting at zero. For the next 11 weeks, every day was a remix of feed the baby, work out in the garage, shower, feed the baby, sleep, work out in the ring, shower, feed the baby, sleep, and repeat. I was exhausted, but grateful to have a goal. Without it, I wouldn't have dug so deep to work on myself. My body slowly started to resemble the way I remembered it, my self-esteem along with it. My return was shrouded in as much secrecy as my debut, so WWE had loaned me a ring that we set up in our backyard. As the Rumble got closer, they sent a couple of match producers out to my house a few days before the event. We brought in some local guys to stand in for the women who didn't even know I would be in the match. My goats watched from the other side of the fence. Because of the nature of the Rumble itself, a match with 30 wrestlers, you can't rehearse for it the way you would a match with 1 or 2 other people. Instead, we were rehearsing just parts. The rolling clothesline, turning around and jumping off someone's back to the elbow. The plan was that I would be the last entrant, come out, people would lose their minds, I would smash everyone who remained in the ring, point at the WrestleMania sign, signifying my return, and go. Trav, Poe, and I hitched a ride from LA to St. Louis, site of the Royal Rumble, on a chartered flight with the cast of Jackass, the guys who made themselves a name on MTV and a series of movies by subjecting themselves to insane stunts like being tasered, snapped by mousetraps, locked in a limo filled with bees, trampled by bulls, and smacked by a giant-sized high-five hand, just to name a few. WWE had granted Johnny Knoxville a spot in the men's Rumble as he promoted Jackass Forever. The guys, Trav excluded, punched each other in the balls while I nursed my baby in the corner. We exited from the charter on the tarmac and loaded into the back of a car that took us to a hotel where I'd be able to rehearse with the other women in the match for the first time. Security led us through the service entrance up to the ballroom where a ring had been set up. "So there's been a change," the producer said when I walked in. My eyes widened. "What change?" "You're going to be coming in at 28. "I've been rehearsing to come in at 30, I said. "What am I supposed to do if I come in at 28? The producer shrugged. "Just look like you're doing something. Keep busy." "Cool," I said in a tone that I hope conveyed that I didn't think it was cool. I left rehearsal, slipped out of the hotel and into the car that was set to take me to my bus. The bus had been suggested by Stephanie McMahon. Steph and Triple H had spent much of their oldest daughter's early years on the road, and Steph said it was only manageable because they had a tour bus. She recommended that if I came back with a baby, that I request one, so I did. The bus was maroon, silver, and white, and, both inside and out, had an aesthetic that can best be described as a tribal tramp stamp. She, vehicles like ships are always her, even came with a name, Scandalous. I looked up at her in awe. After having spent my previous run crisscrossing the country in a rented sedan, this bus, despite being a relic from the late 1990s, wasn't just a step up, it was another atmosphere. "Mike," the bus driver introduced himself, his thick southern accent evident in just that single syllable. I looked around, my mouth dropped. "Can you believe it?" I asked Trav. I turned to see him, standing in the exact middle line of the hallway, realizing at that moment it was the only place on the bus he could fully stand up straight. The next morning, we drove to the arena, shades down, passing Po from lap to lap to keep her happy. I went through the match in my head as my glam team started the transformation from postpartum mom to Royal Rumble champion. We pulled in and parked, our bus blocked off by black curtains to shield me from the world. WWE both leaks word of who its surprise appearances will be while maintaining an appearance of trying to keep them a secret. I paced back and forth on the bus, baby in arms, walking through the match, still unsure of what to do in the keep busy periods. Po alternated between sleeping and staring at me as if trying to reconcile the heavily eyelinered lady in front of her with the person who gave her milk. A producer knocked on my door, giving me a heads up that it was almost time to head to Gorilla. While I was ready to rumble, I was not ready to put on tiny shorts. Instead of sliding on my traditional belly button bearing spandex, I found myself wiggling into a double layer of Spanx and a pair of leggings. One step at a time, I told myself. Then I stepped out of the bus and back into my second run in the WWE. When Joan Jett hit, 45,000 people went wild. I was shocked, even elated. I was expecting outrage at my return, but I didn't smile back. I was returning as a heel, meaning my relationship with the crowd was supposed to be antagonistic. It wasn't just an act. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of knowing they had the power to make me happy. I stormed down the ramp, focused. There were a half a dozen women in the ring when I entered. I tossed a few out, then kept busy. I felt awkward, stalling. Then Shaina's music hit. She ran through a few chicks before taking the middle of the ring. I stood across from her, the crowd starting to buzz as we circled each other. In all this time, we had never shared a ring together. We didn't even touch, but we were like two lightning rods connected by a spark. We felt it. The whole stadium did too. As the crowd reached a fever pitch, we were interrupted by the other women in the ring. The crowd groaned. The moment they hadn't known they wanted already taken away. One woman after another went over the ropes, until in the end, it was just me versus Charlotte Flair. I motioned at her to bring it on, and she charged. I grabbed her, throwing her over the top rope for the win, bringing the crowd to its feet. I raised my arms and pointed at the WrestleMania sign. Pop, 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 pop! A sequence of pyroblasts exploded around the sign. It might not have looked perfect. I might not have hit every spot. I might have forgotten to emote for the camera at every possible second. I might have needed a third layer of Spanx. My boobs might have been on the verge of leaking milk right through my black jumpsuit. But I had just blown the roof off of a sold-out stadium in my return to the ring 4 months after having a baby. A few steps outside Gorilla, I passed Shaina, still in her match gear. White and red leggings with a white sports bra emblazoned with her signature spade across the chest. Did you feel that out there? They want this, she gestured to us both, and they're gonna get it. Seriously, though, she said, her tone shifting from fellow wrestler to genuine friend. Congrats. Aw, thanks, I said pseudo-bashfully. But did you have to try and burn the whole place down? I looked at her confused. The WrestleMania sign, she explained. After you pointed at it and the pyro went off, it caught fire. Really? On fire? It's a sign, I said. Shaina rolled her eyes at my love of wordplay. She kept going instead of dignifying my corniness with a response. In the moment, I took it to mean that I was going to set WWE ablaze. But as the fire began to melt pieces of the sign, forcing the fans to evacuate the seats below, I might have misinterpreted what it was foreshadowing. 16. We left the Royal Rumble and headed to Cincinnati to make an appearance on Raw, the official declaration I was back. Trav flew home from St. Louis, as it was our shared custody week with the boys. Poe slept, nestled in my arms as my Rockstar tour bus took me to the next town. I had committed to 1.5 years for my second run. I had worn myself out and down the first go-round, but was determined this run would be different. In addition to the bus, I had requested a lighter schedule that would give me 1 week off a month and no live shows unless we needed them to prepare for a big event. Because I'd been sequestered before the Rumble, it wasn't until I arrived at Raw that night that I saw how much things had changed. The WWE I was returning to seemed almost unrecognizable to the version of it I had left behind at WrestleMania nearly 3 years before. Backstage felt empty. The pared-down women's locker room seemed almost silent. Everyone seemed jumpier, more on edge. There was no laughter or bustle in the arena hallways. During the pandemic, WWE had made huge cuts, especially on the women's side. And while events had rebounded since the world had started opening back up, the slimmed-down rosters remained. There was one unintended positive result of the cuts. The women's locker room was united in a way it had never been before. It was us against the machine. We were determined to steal the show from the scraps of time we were given to do it. At the same time, a competitor to WWE had begun to emerge in AEW, All Elite Wrestling. It had launched in early 2019 as an edgier, less corporate, and grittier alternative to WWE. Independent promotions were nothing new. Vince McMahon had built WWE by buying up competitors and putting them out of business in the 1980s and 90s. In the years since, small indies existed as a platform for amateur pro wrestlers, especially those looking to build their skills in hope of getting an NXT tryout. But AEW was different. It had money, with its own billionaire backer, Tony Khan. It also had talent, much of it developed by WWE itself, either disgruntled former WWE wrestlers who had been cut, or in many cases, demanded release from the organization. Cody Rhodes, who left WWE because of creative differences, a polite way of saying he reached his breaking point when they made him paint his face and don a gimp suit as a character named Stardust, instead of wrestling as himself, the son of legendary wrestler and promoter Dusty Rhodes, was the face of this new organization. WWE's COVID house cleaning had injected AEW with all the talent it needed to reach that next level. NXT, which had been Triple H's domain, had been caught in the ongoing family dispute between him and Vince McMahon. Vince's unwillingness to give up any control made progress on the main roster all but impossible. But operating out from under Vince's thumb, Triple H had built NXT into a brand that was not only developing WWE's next generation, but producing some of the organization's best and most innovative wrestling. People were excited about NXT, in a way they weren't about Raw and SmackDown's constant reliance on rehashing the same formulaic storylines over and over. As NXT grew, it became apparent that there was the potential to expand and profit from it. Suddenly, it became attractive to Vince. In fall of 2019, WWE launched a weekly NXT show, slated to go head-to-head on air with AEW. Now, NXT was on the up and up, but so too was AEW. Then Triple H almost died, suffering from heart failure and requiring surgery. He stepped away to deal with his health, and in his absence, Vince's cronies saw an opportunity. NXT was losing the ratings battle to AEW, they whispered to Vince. Changes need to be made. Which is how John Laurinaitis, a former wrestler turned WWE executive and all-around dirtbag, ended up running NXT. Laurinaitis had made a name for himself as an average, but by no means outstanding wrestler, before he moved into playing an in-ring authority figure type and then a producer. He looked and acted like an entitled 60-year-old former frat boy, tall, blondish, and with a cleft chin. He always appeared to be scowling even when he smiled. His raspy voice earned him the nickname Johnny Laryngitis, which is one of the nicer things people called him. Whereas Triple H looked for talent and potential in NXT prospects, it appeared John Laurinaitis looked for fuckability. He further purged the NXT roster, firing, it seemed, like everyone over 25, and turning recruiting attention away from the indie circuits in favor of blonde sorority types from places like universities of Florida and Tennessee. Putting the blame for the decline on Laurinaitis, which Vince would basically try to do a few months later, would be easy, but Laurinaitis was only a symptom of what was wrong within WWE. Honestly, the actual drama was so much better than anything WWE could ever script. It quickly became clear to me that the women's division WWE I returned to had regressed. Women's matches were few, far between, and, I'd soon learn, frequently cut down at the last second to give the men more time to run over. Not only that, but morale was low. As wildly as WWE had wielded the axe, a lot of the remaining wrestlers were worried they'd be next. As I looked around what felt like the ruins of what I had been so proud to have been part of building before, I was left wondering what I had gotten myself into. WrestleMania loomed on the horizon, and it would mark my first solo match back in the ring after weeks of cutting promos and a tag match in Saudi Arabia. In response to pandemic-related crowd restrictions, WWE had split WrestleMania into a 2-day event. Once the restrictions were lifted, they realized they could make double the money by selling twice as many tickets if they kept it across 2 days. And so a new era of WrestleMania was born. The initial plan for WrestleMania had been for me to win, but just days before, Vince decided that me winning at Mania was too predictable. I needed to get people to want me to win, not just expect it. At WrestleMania, I armbarred Charlotte and she tapped out for everyone to see. Everyone but the referee, that is, as he had been conveniently knocked out. It happens far more in WWE than the average person would find reasonable. When I went to check on the ref, Charlotte blindsided me, ultimately getting the win. That set up a rematch between the two of us a month later, which is how I came to spend my first Mother's Day standing in the designated makeshift hair and makeup area backstage, watching as Charlotte's hair steamed in the curler while she and the producers debated what we should do in a match that was slated to be live in less than an hour. My mom passed by holding Poe. My daughter saw me and immediately started screaming and crying as she reached for me. I reached out for her. "I got her, just handle your business," my mom said, whisking Poe down the hallway and out of reach. The expression on Poe's face broke my heart. Her cries echoed through the corridor. My eyes welled up. Worst first fucking Mother's Day ever, I thought. My blurred eyes fell onto the sign that said Vince's office across the hall. I made a beeline for it, knocking while entering. Vince was sitting alone next to a monitor in an office chair hunched over his phone. At the surprise intrusion, he gave an expression that likely would have been a raised eyebrow had his face not been heavily Botoxed. He had the appearance of a seedy Vegas mob boss powered by anabolic steroids and Viagra. "I can't fucking do this last-minute shit," I said. "I need to be able to prepare, rehearse. Our match is in an hour and we still don't have it figured out yet." "Don't be ridiculous. You'll do fine," he assured me. "I appreciate your confidence in me, but I didn't come in here for a pep talk," I said. "I came in to tell you that performing with zero prep is not only needlessly dangerous, but we're not being enabled to do our best work." "Don't worry, you ladies are going to knock it out of the park tonight," he replied. "Vince, I want to prove you right and be the best investment you ever made," I told him. "But I got into this game too late to ever improvise a 5-star match like Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels. WWE Hall of Famers known for being able to throw together incredible matches on the fly. I proved in my debut that if you give me the time and the resources to prepare, I can create something really special, but I can't give you my best when forced to constantly throw shit together at the last minute like this." "We'll see what we can do. You'll be fine," he said. "Give them hell tonight." I could tell he was just trying to get me out of the room. I had taken my concerns all the way to the top. I didn't know what else I could do. I looked at the clock on my phone. We had 45 minutes until we were supposed to be in the ring in front of thousands of fans in the stands and millions of people watching at home. We finished scripting the match 30 minutes before we were supposed to enter the arena. The broadcast had already started. There was no way we could rehearse any of it in the ring. "There, you have a whole half hour to memorize it. Plenty of time. You'll be fine," our producer proclaimed with a smile. I was speechless, shocked at the mayhem everyone accepted as normalcy. That sentiment was exactly the problem. I was striving for great while everyone else was settling for fine. As watered down and thrown together as the match was from what we had initially envisioned, it went down as one of the best I Quit matches in history. I walked back into Gorilla, the title belt over my shoulder. Vince sat behind a monitor. "You see?" he said, a look of satisfaction on his face. "You ladies were amazing. Sometimes it just doesn't come across as visceral if you practice it too much." I couldn't even bring myself to fake a smile. All I was thinking about was how much better it could have been. With Charlotte in my rearview mirror, Money in the Bank was next. As a narrative device, winning Money in the Bank provides a big career opportunity, whether by thrusting an up-and-coming star into the spotlight or providing a veteran a segue toward their next planned title run. Money in the Bank also marked my first title defense. Natalya was challenging me for the belt, a match she would lose. But then, cue the music, the winner from the women's ladder match earlier that night would come out, cash in, and take me out. "Who's that going to be?" I asked. "Lacey Evans," Paul Heyman told me. That would be so great for her, I said. Equal parts Southern charm and in-ring brutality. She had served in the Marines before getting into pro wrestling. Lacey had had a baby just a few weeks after I had Poe and was making her own return to WWE. Moms are doing it, I thought to myself. Does she know? I asked. Not yet, Paul said. She's definitely going to get the title, I asked. Has anyone told her? Wait a week or so, Paul said. If nothing changes, you should definitely be the one to tell her. You're the one giving her her first title. A week passed. Nothing changed. I grabbed Lacey when I happened to pass her in a hall. She had been coming up through NXT during my first run. She even helped me develop my Piper's Pit finisher. Hey, you know anything around here could change at any minute, I said. She nodded slowly. I continued. But the plan for the last week or so is that you're going to win Money in the Bank and cash in on me that night. She broke into a huge grin. I wanted to be the one to tell you, I said. I'm so happy to be giving you your first title. I could hear the excitement in her voice as she assured me she wouldn't get her hopes up, but it was clear they already were. 2 days later, I was standing in my kitchen washing baby bottles when my phone rang. Paul Heyman's name appeared on the caller ID. I dried my hands on the fish towel and picked it up. Hey, Paul, what's up? I asked. So Lacey's out, lives in, he said. I was confused. Lacey's hurt? I asked. I had just talked to her. It didn't make sense. No, it's just going to be Liv. Why the change? I asked. Vince is just feeling Liv this week, Paul said matter-of-factly. In any other scenario, I would have been nothing but happy for Liv. We made our WWE debuts around the same time. With the exception of Shaina, I was probably closer to Liv than any other woman on the roster. She had more momentum and fan support than anyone. She was clearly the best choice. But I had just told Lacey she was going to win Money in the Bank and be champ, and now she wasn't. All I could think of was it would have been better if I kept my big mouth shut. That way she'd never have known. I hung up, throwing the phone onto the counter, immediately regretting it as the noise startled Poe from her nap. I was angry for Lacey, angry that the WWE had put me in this position, angry because Lacey probably didn't even fucking know and was out there walking around excited about a moment that would never come. Angry that this old man with our careers and legacies in his hands put no more thought into his decisions than how he was feeling in the moment. Angry that it wasn't Liv's years of backbreaking work, sacrifice, hard-earned fan support, or star power that made this moment happen, but the whims of a geriatric billionaire who treated us like action figures. Despite the progress that had been made, our efforts were more frivolous than ever. Poe started to cry, and it was only then that I realized that tears were also streaming down my face. I felt like I was being set up to fail. My job was to go out in front of tens of thousands of people in person and millions of people watching on TV and get them to believe a story that some nearly 80-year-old chauvinist was improvising on the spot. It felt like an impossible task. Fuck Vince, I said to myself. My phone rang again. Poe was losing her shit, but I picked up anyway. It was John Laurinaitis, Vince's #1 sycophant. We're going to need you to jump on a plane between shows this week to hit Good Morning America in New York to promote Money in the Bank, he said. Travel will be in touch with the details. It wasn't a request. It was an order. I can't, I said, juggling Poe in one arm while holding the phone in the other. I can't put my baby through 5 cross-country flights in less than a week. When I came back, I was told I wouldn't be required to do that kind of travel. He made a sound that I could only interpret to mean, I don't care. We gave you the title so you could do these things for us, he said. You gave me the title because it benefits your company for me to carry around your bedazzled logo in belt form on TV every week, I thought. Instead, I just said, I never asked for the title. Give it to someone who will then. I hung up. Fuck Vince, I repeated, adding, and fuck Laurinaitis too. Somewhere out there, it seemed like karma heard me. The next morning, the Wall Street Journal published a story detailing how Vince had paid $3 million to cover up an affair with a paralegal on the WWE payroll. According to the report, and to the surprise of absolutely no one backstage, during the affair, Vince had doubled her salary and when he was done with her, had passed her over to John Laurinaitis. The woman had signed an NDA to keep it all quiet, but a friend of hers had not and emailed the board. Of course, as the board started to dig further in the allegations, they found a whole bunch of other shit because spending a few million on hush money to pay off a paralegal that you and your friend use for blowjobs is typically only the tip of the iceberg. It turns out that there were a number of other female employees that Vince had signed NDAs and paid settlements, in addition to the numerous women who had previously come forward over the years with claims against Vince for sexual assault, harassment, and discrimination. You might think that would be enough to push Vince out, or at least to make him lay low. WWE issued a lame statement saying that he was going to step back as CEO and from the board, but that he would still oversee creative. To the outside world, that might have sounded like some kind of repercussion, but internally, the message was clear. Nothing is going to change. 2 nights later, Vince went on SmackDown, looked straight at the camera, and recited WWE's slogan, "Then, now, forever." Fortunately, I had the week off. 17. There was a knock on the bus door. "Come in," I yelled. The door opened, and I heard the hesitant footsteps of a rider coming up the 4 stairs. "Come in," I said, gesturing grandly, as I was sitting in the chair as Abe braided my hair. I pointed the remote at the TV, pausing the 7th season of RuPaul's Drag Race. Poe sat on the floor, surrounded by toys as she played with a rock she had brought in from outside. From the way the rider stood hesitantly in the doorway, as if she did not want to be there, I could tell she had not come bearing good news. She took a deep breath. "So, there's been a last-minute change," she said. I could feel my eyes narrow. I sighed. She was only the messenger, I reminded myself. I stared down at where her tapered suit pants cropped above her Doc Marten boots, attempting to hide the exasperation on my face. WWE required the producers and creative staff to wear suits backstage, as if having everyone look like it was a professional organization was the same thing as it being run like a professional organization. There had been nothing but last-minute changes since Money in the Bank, but the more things changed, the more they stayed the same. As expected, the board of directors' investigation into Vince had yielded more allegations, more NDAs, and more payouts to more women. They determined that the financial threshold between not doing a fucking thing and the appearance of making a change fell somewhere between $3 million and $15 million in hush money. John Laurinaitis took the brunt of the fall, separating from WWE altogether, probably with a big fucking check and an NDA of his own. Vince had announced his retirement, with Triple H tapped to take over creative control. That would have been amazing if it had actually happened. Instead, Triple H would put together a version of the show 2 days before the broadcast with the writers. Vince would demand copies of the script, then call up production, change the whole show, and continue requesting changes until the wrestlers walked through the curtain and sometimes even after. My first run, there had been a constant tweaking of dialogue and last-minute match changes, but when it came to the storyline, everyone usually knew where things were ultimately headed from one pay-per-view to another. Under Vince's undisputed authoritarian reign, if worst came to worst, you could cash in one of your unofficial audience with the king chips and stand outside Vince's office until you could appeal to him directly. This time around, no one knew what to do or who to answer to or who had the final word. My first go-around, schedules were made up months in advance. Now it was often impossible to even know if you were needed on the next show until the day before. I was supposed to take my title back from Liv at SummerSlam, but Vince decided that we needed to build Liv up as a champion longer. As he envisioned that match, I'd get Liv in an armbar, she'd tap, but for what felt like the 500th time in a row, the ref wouldn't see it, and I got screwed yet again. Even I was bored with that version of the ending, and it was setting Liv up for the crowd to turn on her. We tried to appeal to Triple H, but he said Vince was adamant. This was going to set up the moment I turned. People had to understand why I was angry. They had to believe I was pushed to my breaking point. And I was, only not because of some bullshit official calls. The ending was not embraced by the fan base. Liv, just a week before, the WWE Universe's most beloved champion, was rained down upon with "you tapped out" chants. When I brought it up to Heyman, he blamed Liv for getting flustered by it. "She invited the reaction she got," he said. "Just one fan chanted. She responded. She should have just ignored him. It was her fault." The attitude within WWE's executive office was sink or swim. And if you happened to drown, well, that was fine with them as long as it made good TV. If that's the case, then they put her in a situation that exceeded her experience, I argued. They set her up to fail. Heyman shrugged. "That's the business we're in," he said in a tone of someone who had long ago accepted madness as normalcy. I assumed that was the only way to exist in such a world and not be driven mad yourself. But he was right. It was the WWE way. When things go according to last-minute plans, they claim there's a method to the madness. When things don't, they blame the talent. A few weeks later, I was rehearsing in the ring with some of the other girls before doors opened to the fans when Liv made a beeline to the ring from Gorilla. "Have you seen Aaliyah?" she asked. We shook our heads. Aaliyah had come up to SmackDown the year before. She had been partnered with Raquel Rodriguez and they'd briefly held the tag team titles. But then Aaliyah was sidelined with a shoulder injury. "I just ran into her, almost hysterically crying," she said. "She was asking if it's true that none of the talent wants to work with her." We exchanged confused looks. I didn't know Aaliyah well, but I'd had nothing but great interactions with her. She was one of the sweetest girls in the locker room. Not only that, but the women's locker room got along really well. Better than ever, actually. Backstabbing and double-crossing played out on TV. It couldn't have been farther from the truth in real life. "Why would she think that?" I asked. "They wanted her to come back from her shoulder injury right away, but she said she needed more time. That's when Bruce Pritchard told her that all the producers were trying to bury her and no one wanted to work with her. She was really upset." I felt my jaw and fists clench at the mere mention of his name. Bruce Pritchard was another Vince McMahon crony. If "what do you say you do here" was a person, it would be him. No one knew what exactly his job was or how he got it. He was the type of guy who carries a briefcase just so it looks like he's doing something. Yet somehow, he'd wormed his way up to executive producer, handpicked by Vince because he knew Bruce was the kind of guy you could control from a distance through an earpiece. "Why would anyone say that about Aaliyah?" Bailey asked. "Everyone loves her." Bruce Pritchard was loitering behind one of the announcer tables. "Let's go fucking tell him right now," I said. I stepped between the ropes and out of the ring. Liv scrambled to catch up with me. Bailey followed. "You're coming in real hot," Liv said with a nervous nasal laugh. "Just let me talk first, okay?" "Okay," I said. I took a step back, letting her take the lead. The women in WWE didn't stand up for each other to upper management in unison often. Even for established talent like Liv and Bailey, there were concerns about repercussions. They stood to gain nothing professionally for sticking up for Aaliyah, which made me all the more proud to be standing beside them. 10 tense steps later, we arrived at the table. Liv gave a half wave to get Bruce's attention. "Hi, yes, hello, sir," she said hesitantly. "Is it okay if we talk to you about something for a second?" He looked up at us with the expression of a man who was annoyed to be interrupted by a bunch of chicks, until he saw my even more bothered expression. He pivoted to force a smile. "Sure." "So," Liv started sweetly, cocking her head to the side. She spoke with the accent of a Jersey girl with the cadence of a Valley girl. "Well, we just wanted to, tell you that we heard something and we don't know who's talking, but we really love Aaliyah. And we don't know who's speaking for us or anything like that, but any complaints about her are not coming from any of us. We love her. We love working with her, and she's the best." I stood behind Liv, my arms crossed like an enforcer. Bruce's strained grin held. He held the air of a failed used car salesman. I cleared my throat to send a message, not because I needed a cough. "And I would really appreciate it if you weren't taking other people's word at face value and speaking for us," I said slowly. In fact, I would appreciate it if you didn't talk to anyone about what we said unless we said it to you. You have a question about that, you talk to us. He nodded enthusiastically. I love Aaliyah, he almost shouted. She's great. Yeah, I have no idea where that came from. He looked around as if he was actually looking for someone to pin the blame on. The other girls and I exchanged, "Can you believe this guy?" looks. I'll talk to her, he said as if it was all a misunderstanding. I nodded, lingering just a little bit longer than the other ladies once they turned to leave. I'd make sure to give Aaliyah a hug the next time I saw her, I thought to myself. But I never saw Aaliyah again. After that night, she all but disappeared, as if she vanished into thin air. Even long after her shoulder had healed, it had sent a clear message. In the organization's eyes, talent was disposable. Triple H asked me to be patient. He had stepped into a total clusterfuck and was trying to sort it all out. I reluctantly agreed. I felt I owed him that much. After all, it was because he had been willing to take a chance on me that I was in the WWE in the first place. Besides, we were on the same page. He had shown a commitment to the women's division that no one else on the creative side had even come close to demonstrating. He wasn't some women's wrestling Jesus, but he was trying. I felt like when I spoke, Triple H actually listened. He seemed open to change as long as it was good for business. In a lot of ways, it was reminiscent to the relationship I had built with Dana in the UFC. Back then, I had refused to refer to my belt as the women's title, or my division as the women's division. No one, I pointed out to Dana, referred to it as the men's title or the men's division. I wasn't asking for anything more or different than the way the men were treated. Dana, who was far from the poster child for the liberal left, having spoken at the Republican National Convention, thought about it for a second. Good point, he said. The next fight card in Brazil, 2 women bantamweights entered the arena to be introduced simply as bantamweights. Bantamweights referring to the 135-pound weight division. No one noticed but me. No one at home was left asking, wait, what gender are these people? What the fuck am I watching? When the WWE writers handed me scripts where I was supposed to declare myself the women's champion, I crossed out the word women's, and much to Vince's displeasure, making even a single word of change without his approval is not acceptable, addressed myself as the champion. Vince noted you dropped women's, one of the producers mentioned to me one night. When the men start calling it a men's title, I'll start calling it a women's, I said. I raised the issue with Triple H. If the men didn't need to say, this is for the men's Intercontinental Championship, why did we have to call it the women's SmackDown title? Good point, he said. He later told me he mentioned it to Vince, who was appalled. Get out of here with that woke bullshit, Vince had told him. We're going to call it the women's title because they're fucking women. Vince, I had learned, wasn't like Dana. Dana still had that poor kid mentality of having something to prove, driven to make as much money as possible to gain the respect of his billionaire cohorts. A true capitalist, it seemed that for Dana, his worth was measured by his net worth. Vince was an entirely different animal. He was practically born into the billionaires club and had nothing to prove. He didn't come off as someone whose goal was to make his company as much money as possible, but rather to leverage his wealth and power to impress his worldview on those watching. If the product and bottom line had to suffer for it, so be it. A true dictator, his worth was measured by his influence. I tried to be patient, but I was also persistent. Following SummerSlam, at the end of July, I asked again about building toward the singles match with Becky at Mania. I didn't want an opportunity for greatness to pass me by again. The tracks were being laid in front of the runaway train that was the WWE, and it seemed more and more like we were about to blow past the station. We'll get to it after Survivor Series, I was told. That was almost 4 months away, giving us just 4 months to build Mania. And we still had zero plan for anything. We've got plenty of time, Heyman promised whenever I expressed concern about time ticking away. We'll have plenty of time. I took the title back from Liv at Extreme Rules in October. In the lead-up, We rehashed the same old bullshit they gave us to say. We figured we'd make up for it in the match itself. We were adamant that this match have an epic finish. I racked my brain, then it came to me. One of the most iconic weapons in a Extreme Rules match was thumbtacks, a weapon made iconic by the company itself. Imagine this finish, I told Liv, and then laid it out. The two of us grappling on the ground in a ring covered in thumbtacks until I finally get Liv once again in my signature armbar. Echoing back to her previous match, Liv at the same time gets me in a pin. The ref starts counting the pin. I arch into the thumbtacks to raise one shoulder off the ground. But Liv, refusing to give up, lets me break her arm, passing out from the pain instead of tapping again. She falls right on the thumbtacks and me. I would get the title back as WWE's creative team wanted. Liv would come off looking like a badass, and everyone in the audience and at home would be going wild because it was fucking thumbtacks. Liv paused for a second, biting her bottom lip. I could see her walking through the match in her mind. She got to the end and broke into the biggest smile. Dude, I fucking love it. We took it to the producers. Absolutely not, came the reply before we'd even finished the word thumbtacks. We can't do anything that intentionally breaks the skin. What? We responded in flabbergasted unison. WWE was notorious for these kinds of stunts. They literally made thumbtacks a universally accepted thing in professional wrestling. Fake thumbtacks were out too. What about rubber glass? I asked, knowing the answer before the words left my lips. Again, we had to settle for a finish neither of us were too impressed with. And so did the audience. The next big event, Survivor Series, approached in flashes of half-thought-through, thrown together at the last-minute mediocrity. Vince and Triple H were jockeying for control, and everyone was caught up in their dysfunctional family feud each week. We were approaching 6 months of creative chaos. Promises that things would soon settle down continued. We believed them even less than the dialogue we delivered in the ring. It had become like one of those toxic workplaces. Producers and or writers dragged themselves down the hallway, undoubtedly questioning all their life decisions, to tell wrestlers to scratch the previous changes they'd been given for these new changes. With Vince, still lying low from being Me Too'd out of the building, relegated to a role of interfering from the sidelines instead of commanding from the forefront, there were glimmers of incremental improvements. But any progress was lost amongst the chaos. Even when we had a great show, it was at the expense of days of needless anxiety. Everyone was just trying their best to get through the day unscathed, and it showed. I kept asking myself, how could they make something so innately fun so fucking stressful? I was caught up in the weekly disorganization. I hardly had time to focus on the upcoming pay-per-view I was supposed to be building toward. Once again the champion after beating Liv, Survivor Series presented perhaps my biggest challenge to date. I'd be paired up against Shotzi. Her punk rock ring persona and anything goes attitude made her well liked but not yet well known. For the first time, I'd be the most senior person in the ring. Not only that, but the card we were on was stacked with matches that were going to get the crowd riled up. We didn't want the segment to be where they were let down. Your top rope DDT would be a perfect way for us to get to the outside here, I said in practice. I'd been watching Shotzi's highlights, trying to become familiar with her moveset. In a DDT, you overhook someone's head with one arm, then fall on your back to make it appear as if the other person smacked their head on the ground. There is a wow factor because it looks like a move that can fuck a person up. Done correctly, it's completely safe. Done wrong, someone can actually get seriously hurt. But when we got to the venue to practice, the ring was encased in a giant steel cage structure. Unable to rehearse the spot, producers sent some guy that I'd never seen before or since to help me with it. As he walked me through the motions, he kept repeating, "Just make sure you put one hand on the waist and the other on her thigh and guide her to the floor." "Got it," I replied. "Hip, thigh, guide her to the floor. Guide her to the floor. Got it." Later, when I was in the hallway reciting the match trying to memorize it, he passed by. "Remember, hip, thigh, guide her to the floor," I said. "Got it. Exactly. Good luck out there." When the time for the match came, and it started out well, the crowd even seemed into it. We got to the DDT spot. One hand on the hip, other on the thigh, guide her to the floor. I walked myself through the steps as I did it, She hit the floor perfectly, safely, but I was so focused on her safe landing that I forgot to bump. Instead of falling flat on my face and pretending the DDT hurt me, I looked completely unscathed. While that was the point, it wasn't supposed to look like that was the point. Shit, I thought. The deafening lack of audience reaction rang in my ears. Just move on to the next spot. You'll get them back. We moved on. Shotzi jumped over the barricade onto me and several extras planted in the crowd. Holy shit! Chants of approval followed us back into the ring. All right, we got him back, I thought. I knew what we had left in the match was going to leave my blunder a distant memory. Shotzi started climbing onto the top of the turnbuckle. Go home, the ref shouted at me. Go home means go directly to the finish. Wrap up the match. The referee has an earpiece and receives direction from the top during the match. What? Why? I didn't understand. We were just getting them back. I didn't argue. I countered Shotzi's attack and went straight into the armbar finish. Boos rained down on us. I walked up the ramp, humiliated, like I was being dragged off stage with a giant cane. I threw back the curtain to Gorilla, heading straight to where Triple H was sitting behind the monitor. What happened? I demanded. Was it because of the missed DDT? We were just getting them back. He looked at me, slightly confused. No, he assured me. We're just heavy on time. The guys before you went over by 6 minutes. He put his headphones back on and focused back on the monitor. This is some bullshit, I thought. The non-title men's match went over by 3/4 of our total 8-minute title match time? It put a worrying trend into focus. The time the women were given to wrestle had been getting whittled down more and more all year. Jen handed me my phone on the walk to the bus. #FireRonda was trending worldwide because of my botched spot. I rarely made technical mistakes in the ring. When I did, I agonized over them, but as I watched myself go viral, this time I felt something more than just embarrassed. I also felt pissed off. 2 male wrestlers were recently involved in botched spots that spiked them on the top of their heads. Madcap Moss was lucky to walk away with a sore neck. When Big E got spiked on his head, his body went rigid as he fell to the mat with a broken neck. Doctors told him he may never wrestle again. I honestly couldn't tell you who spiked either of those guys on their heads, but I can tell you that there were no #FireWhoeverTheFuck campaigns trending on Twitter because of it. But all of a sudden it's #FireRonda? This is some real bullshit, I thought. The only upside was we had finally gotten past Survivor Series. When are we going to start planning for Mania? I texted Heyman. We'll talk before the new year, came the reply. 18. I sat alone on the curb, barefoot in the parking lot, staring at the outline of the trees. The bus was parked behind a hotel next to a swamp in the outskirts of Tampa. The air was so thick with humidity you could see it in the dull glow of the dim street lights. It was 3 a.m. I had given up on going to bed. I couldn't sleep. Something moved in the bushes next to me, just underneath a sign reading, "Warning, alligators." If you're planning to attack me, just get it over with, I said silently to whatever lurked in the bush. The rustling stopped. I waited a few seconds to see if I was going to have to wrestle a fucking gator. When nothing happened, I held the joint up to my lips and inhaled. An orange glow pierced the darkness. This is it, I thought to myself, reflecting on my WWE career as I blew smoke into the darkness of the Florida swamp. This is the lowest point. I had touched down in Miami 3 days earlier, determined to get answers. It was 3 days after Christmas and more than a month after Survivor Series, and I still hadn't been able to get any clarity or collaboration from anyone as we headed into the final months of my WWE return. Poe had woken up that morning with a fever, so I left her behind at home for the very first time. Miami had the vibe of a Caribbean Christmas, with holiday lights strung up on palm trees and pink flamingos decked in Santa hats. But I was feeling anything but festive. I just want to get some answers, I had told Heyman for the 10,000th time before boarding my flight. For 6 months, he kept promising next week we'd have some direction. I'm done waiting for next week, I said, exasperated. A few more next weeks, and Mania will be next week. Raquel Rodriguez and I were set to wrestle a full match, an increasing rarity on the women's side. To rehearse, we would do the Miami live show before heading to Tampa for SmackDown. A 6'1" Latina from Texas, Raquel physically towered over the rest of the women's division. She was muscular, like a former college basketball player, not a competitive bodybuilder. She was the kind of opponent I loved facing in the ring, not only because she looked capable of actually challenging me, but she was also so strong I felt safe trying anything with her. Outside of the ring, I just liked her in general. Always smiling, always with an encouraging word, always looking for the good in everyone and every situation. Raquel was a genuinely nice person. She had come up from NXT earlier in the year. She had lost to me in her first ever title match, an answer to one of my open challenges, a banger despite us never having worked with each other and us throwing it together that same day. Now, she got a rematch, and we had time to prepare. She wasn't going to win, but I was happy she was going to get some much-deserved time in the spotlight to show what she was capable of. I was just about to change into my ring gear for the live show match when I got a text from Heyman. "Someone is going to call you in the next hour to tell you the plan until Mania," it read. To tell me? I read it again. To tell me. Heyman is a man who has made his entire livelihood around his ability to craft words in a way that convey exactly what they're meant to convey. I pulled on my gear and walked into the arena, pacing the empty hallways as I waited for the call, getting angrier with each passing second. The phone rang. I answered. "Ronda, Bruce Pritchard," came the voice on the other end. I rolled my eyes so far back they touched my brain. "Do you have a minute?" "I'm just about to have a match with Raquel," I said, which he already knew. "I'll be quick," Pritchard said. "Tomorrow, you're going to have the match with Raquel. After you win, Charlotte is going to come out and challenge you. You're going to put Charlotte over at Rumble. Then you're going to win the Elimination Chamber. And from there, you're going to challenge Bianca and then put her over at Mania." I stood there for a moment, trying to compose the sounds in my brain into words that weren't fuck. I had towed the company line. I had gone out and done whatever was asked of me. I had let them use my name and face to sell a product that I knew was spiraling because I had thought that I would be given a chance to make things just a little bit better. It had all been for nothing. They never saw me as a partner or even a premier talent. I felt beat down and let down. I would appreciate being part of these conversations instead of hearing about it last minute, I said. I want to be part of coming up with these ideas. I want to work to put stuff together with you guys. I've been trying to have this discussion for a year now. Pritchard scoffed, adding, "Yeah, well, we'll try our best to accommodate you." Now, you can misinterpret words or tone, but you can't misinterpret a scoff. I hung up and turned back to Raquel, who was going over the match one last time a few steps down the hall outside Gorilla. "Let's handle this shit," I said, just as Joan Jett hit and the crowd cheered. I went out that night fueled by adrenaline and rage, and we put on one of my best matches since I'd been back to a raucous house show crowd. But as soon as I stepped back through the curtain, I was fuming. The next morning, I woke up on the bus, parked in front of the Tampa Arena for SmackDown, livid. I texted Heyman, "New plan. I'm dropping the title to Charlotte tonight." It wasn't an ask. It was a demand. Heyman knew me well enough to read between the lines and relate to creative the part that I had left unsaid. That if I didn't get my way this time, I was going to walk. I found Charlotte as she was getting ready to rehearse and informed her that she would be walking out of the arena with the title. She didn't have her gear, he pointed out, but she could send someone to make the 2.5-hour round-trip drive to her house to get it. "Do it," I said. That night, to the legitimate shock of everyone in attendance, Raquel and I had the match of the night. For the finish, she had me on her shoulders atop the turnbuckle in the corner of the ring. I looked done for, but then contorted myself into a standing armbar balanced on her shoulders. Raquel held onto the ropes, forced to choose between tapping, letting her arm break, or taking the steep fall behind us. She took the fall. We both crashed down into the center of the ring together, but her valiant effort was in vain. I kept the armbar. She was forced to tap. The crowd gave her a standing ovation as she left the ring. She was an obvious huge star in the making. Bruised and battered from a hell of a match, I held up the title. Charlotte's music hit. The crowd roared. Charlotte, arguably the best wrestler of a generation, had the obvious benefit of nepotism. Despite her consistent excellence, the crowd resented her for her birthright advantages. But not tonight. Charlotte came out and challenged me for the title that I had taken from her last time we met in the ring. I was in no shape to defend, but my pride got the best of me. Shaina, who had been ringside, tried to make me see reason, to rest and recover first. But that's not what a true champion does. I accepted and quickly lost. The crowd lost their collective minds. Charlotte reveled in the crowd's adoration. She ran into the audience, embraced by the chants and adoration in a way she had never been able to before. I was finally the heel I always wanted to be. Just like Roddy Piper, I felt like I could get anyone over. I was happy to have been a part of it, but the second I walked back through the curtain from the arena into Gorilla, I returned to the real world, where I was still fucking pissed. I walked up to Triple H behind the monitors. He shook my hand, congratulating me on a hell of a show. Thank you, I replied. Thank you for trusting us to do it that way. I need to talk to you. When are you going to have time? He said he had some network bigwigs to meet with after the show, but he could meet with me in his office after. After the show was over, I stood outside the door marked Paul Levesque. The hallways bustled with people packing our little traveling circus up to move on to the next town. I watched the parade of hard-sided black road boxes and wooden crates roll by, seething. I wasn't going anywhere until I talked to Triple H. I clenched and unclenched my fists. My lips were twitching. Finally, Triple H waved me in. I didn't even wait for the standard pleasantries. I feel like I was sold a false bill of goods, I said. He nodded, indicating that he knew exactly what I was talking about. I wasn't sure if that made it worse or better. I thought it was going to be a certain way when I came here, I said, and it hasn't. And I've been trying to have this conversation all year about Mania, and no one will fucking talk to me. Not only that, but now I'm hearing that it is a completely different plan that you have in mind. I was waiting for him to cut me off. He didn't. I don't care so much about the change of plans. It's the fact that I'm not even allowed to be part of the conversation. No one said anything to me about it until now. I was trying to be professional, but a year's worth of being brushed off and disregarded was boiling over. The thing with Becky at WrestleMania, he said, is we can't get there in time. We don't have time to build it. For the second time in as many days, I was not so much at a loss for words, but at a loss for words that wouldn't get me arrested. I took a deep breath instead. We've had a whole year to build it, I said coldly. I'm sorry, Triple H said. I wanted to believe him. Then he kept talking. Anyway, Piper's Hollywood backlot brawl is a classic, but it was booed out of the building. Long cinematic backstages just don't work for a live audience, he added, like he wasn't in charge of the whole goddamn thing. Then why not say so instead of nodding emphatically when I came to pitch you guys years ago? I asked. And what I pitched wasn't a long backstage match like theirs, but segments spread throughout the show. And anyway, it doesn't matter. It didn't have to be exactly that. I just wanted to be part of developing something with you guys. Remember when I first got here? I had that perfect match with you, Steph, and Kurt. That's how I thought it was going to be here, being part of this organization. Instead, I feel like I was given a false representation of what it would be like to work here. It was all an act to get me in the door and fall in love with this industry. Ever since then, I feel like my love for wrestling has been weaponized against me, but I can't be associated with mediocre shit. In that moment, I made a decision. I was done. I was done fighting. I was done trying to fix a system that didn't want to be fixed. I was done putting so much time and energy where it wasn't appreciated. Listen, I told you I'd be here until SummerSlam, I said, and I'm a woman of my word, but I'm done after this. All I wanted when I got into this business was to tag with Shaina, have her turn on me, and then put her over before I leave. We have until SummerSlam to make that happen. After that, I'm done being associated with this minimum effort, lazy ass shit show. I could feel my lip quivering. I was so worked up, it took everything I had to hold back tears. He shook his head like someone who silently shared my frustration. Okay, I get it, he said. I get it. I nodded, indicating I had said my piece. I moved to leave when he stretched out his hand. I thought to shake mine. Instead, he leaned in, gently touched my arm. He dipped his head, looking up at me. His tone shifted from authority figure to friend. But how are you? He asked sincerely. I burst into tears, not just crying, but bawling. I'm so tired, I said. I'm so tired that I feel like it's changing my personality. I'm so much more anxious, stressed, negative, like butter scraped over too much bread. Triple H looked at me blankly. He obviously hadn't just listened to Lord of the Rings as an audiobook driving to and from IVF. My ass is struggling, dragging a baby across the country, trying to keep her happy for hours every week in the confines of a single airplane seat, all while Brock, Roman, and even Logan fucking Paul are being chartered around for their comfort, and no one fucking cares. All just to do mediocre work. I'm physically so goddamn tired and mentally even more goddamn tired of this fucking bullshit. I'm over it. I tried to slow my breathing so I wasn't hyperventilating as I sobbed. But the worst part is I really thought this would be so fucking great. And now I'm just disappointed. Not just disappointed, but heartbroken because I had such high hopes. It seems so fucking stupid and naive now. I looked around the room for a tissue, but his office wasn't actually an office, just a random room in a hockey arena where they set up a desk. Triple H looked around, not sure what to do. There was nothing he could say to make it better. I walked out of the arena knowing that my WWE career would never be what I had envisioned. It would never be what I had hoped. We left the arena, and Mike parked the bus for the night. I went back to the bedroom and started packing, throwing things angrily into my suitcase. Out of the pocket of my jeans fell a joint that looked like it was from an old-school rap video. Ric Flair, Charlotte's father, and one of the original Four Horsemen had given it to me backstage. I tiptoed out past the bunks where Maria and Jen were sleeping, through the kitchen, and stepped outside. My eyes took a minute to adjust, and even then, it was so dark everything beyond the glow of a single streetlight just appeared as a silhouette. I lit the joint, feeling sorry for myself. Until I didn't. Maybe it was the relief of not getting chomped by an alligator. Maybe it was Ric Flair's weed. But as I sat out there wallowing, I had to admit that, as a low point, this was pretty nice. I thought back to 7 years before. I had been shivering in a tent by myself, making repeated trips to shit in the woods. My skin had been peeling off, my teeth loose, my lip literally split in half. I was sicker than I had ever been in my life, mentally and physically. I had been dreading every moment of existence. That was my lowest point. That had broken me. This, I told myself, as I stood up from the curb and dusted myself off, this was just some make-believe bullshit. 19. After our meeting in Tampa, Triple H agreed to let me set up a weekly meeting with SmackDown's head writer and Paul Heyman 3 days before the show, the day before they pitched ideas to Triple H. It was by no means a seat at the table. At best, they were letting me stand outside the door of the room where the table was, but it was better than being locked out of the building. Our first call was the day after the 2023 Royal Rumble. The night prior, Sami Zayn turned on the Bloodline, a faction featuring Vince's anointed WWE king, Roman Reigns, and his cousins. A culminating moment that had all the hallmarks of Paul Heyman's genius. First off, congrats on Sami's turn at Rumble, I said to Paul before the meeting kicked off. It was fucking perfect. Why, thank you, he said proudly. A year of planning went into that exact moment. I froze. The smile dropped from my face into a tight line. It took all my restraint to keep from chucking the phone across the room. Must be nice to plan something that far ahead, I said, my words dripping with sarcasm. As frustrating as it was, I was done letting it bother me. When I accepted I couldn't change WWE, I decided to focus on myself. There was a huge amount of freedom and reflection that came with accepting the inevitable. I wasn't going to be able to elevate women in WWE the way I had in UFC. So the question became, what do I want? Why was I banging my head against the wall over this? I had gotten into pro wrestling because it was fun, because it was a chance to spend time with my friends. Somewhere along the way, I had lost sight of that, so I went back to the beginning. Marina and Jessamine had been cut in the pandemic roster purge, but Shaina remained. I was determined to go out with a bang with my fellow horsewomen. The thing is, Heyman relayed, Vince doesn't think pairing you and Shaina up would make sense. I raised an eyebrow. This isn't MMA, Heyman attempted to explain. He thinks no one in the WWE universe knows you and Shaina are friends. My first appearance in WWE was with Shaina, Marina, and Jessamine, I said. Stephanie McMahon herself introduced us as the Four Horsewomen. You heard the crowd at Rumble last year when we were about to go at it. The fans want this. I didn't say it makes sense. It was one of his favorite go-to responses when speaking for Vince. I tag with Shaina or I'm done, I said. By February, Shaina and I had been brought together as a tag team by my assistants and some very mediocre writing. Instead of seeing the two of us as an opportunity to turn the tag titles on the women's side into something fans might actually care about, they gave us little attention and even less time. The way I saw it, though, holding the tag titles allowed me to build up Shaina and other women in the division 2 at a time. The problem was, WWE didn't have a women's tag division, just a pair of belts that occasionally switched hands between various girls who seemed to be paired up at random. For us to be champions, we had to build a division, align as many women as possible into teams. We didn't have enough women on the roster to have them specialize in singles or tag the way the men were able to. Everyone had to do both for there to be a division. At any given taping, there were 10 or so women each on SmackDown and Raw. There were 2 or 3 men on the roster for every woman. To give the illusion that there was actually a tag team division, I urged the producers to match Shaina and me up against as many women teams as possible. The idea was met with quizzical looks as if there weren't any other women. I suggested Tegan Nox and Chelsea Green, 2 wrestlers who had just been promoted from NXT and weren't being used in any storyline at the time. When I got to the venue for the first live show in the campaign, I was told we'd be facing Natalya and Tegan. We had just beaten Natalya and Shotzi the week before. Facing Natty again with just a different partner didn't make any sense, and it trivialized her alliance with Shotzi. When I raised that point, I was brushed off. You said you wanted to face more women. Tegan's a woman. I was told as if I should just shut up and be grateful. I said more women's tag teams, I said. You requested getting reps on live shows for TV. That's what they're giving you, the producer mansplained. It's a win. I was frustrated, but over fighting a losing battle. We were going to do what we always did and make the best of it. Toward the end of the match, I took the bump from Tegan and slapped the mat hard, popping back up. The pain was immediate. I let it show on my face like I was selling and kept going. After the match, I slid out of the ring, my arm throbbing. I was used to my elbow randomly dislocating. It was an occupational hazard from never having tapped out in judo, but this time was different. I hugged Shaina one-armed after the match. You okay? She asked, nodding to the arm. I waved her off, indicating it was nothing. Elbow just popped out again, happens all the time. Back on the bus, I started to think maybe I was wrong. My left elbow was already the size of a grapefruit. I could hardly bend it. Poe stood on the floor, her arms outstretched, crying to be picked up. I tried to lift her and she arched backward, wiggling and overtired. It hurt too much to hold her. I sat down on the floor, surrounded by her toys, and she crawled up on my lap. I rested my chin on her head, trying to will the pain away, trying to be a good mom. It felt like it was all slipping away. I didn't have time to be hurt. Shaina and I had just weeks to make the storyline believable. The schedule meant I had just 2 days before I had to be back on the road. The swelling had gone down by morning, but I was still limited enough that I needed to see a doctor. There was no other way I could get an MRI and have it read on such short notice. I reluctantly reached out to WWE's medical staff. "I don't see anything concerning here at first glance," the MRI technician said, "but your doctor will take a closer look at it and let you know if anything comes up." Not my doctor, WWE's doctor, I thought. There was a reason I avoided the medical staff whenever possible. Their loyalty was to the company. I headed to the airport the next morning without yet having gotten the official results, but feeling better. I could move. I was more than capable of wrestling with just one arm. WWE itself had me do it in a match as a gimmick. I just needed to be taped up. I left Po home. She'd already flown enough miles to circle the globe 4 times in her tiny life. She was past the stage of sleeping in my arms an entire flight, but not yet at the stage where I could give her an iPad and headphones to keep her attention until landing. I just didn't have it in me to chase her up and down the aisles on a cross-country flight to DC with a bad arm. When she saw the car coming to pick me up for the airport, she jumped into the car and tried to close the door after her. She sobbed as Trav peeled her off my leg. I sobbed from the back seat as the car pulled away. In the air, I texted Heyman my thoughts for the segment. "We had to wait for medical clearance," he explained. I rolled my eyes. This is why I hadn't wanted to involve WWE's doctors in the first place. I relayed what the technician had told me about not seeing immediate cause for concern. Heyman reached out to my segment's writer to share that information. I looked out somewhere over the Midwest, 30,000 feet below and still covered in snow, waiting for a reply. On my phone, 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. The writer's message came through. Heyman copy and pasted a text from one of the corporate shills. It read, "The executive director, Bruce Pritchard himself, declared to me that Ronda is not cleared to work a match tomorrow per our medical team. I am in the same boat here and want Ronda to be able to work the match, but this is all the information and direction I have." I reread the text in my head, only in a British accent accompanied by the sound of trumpets. It was all so fucking ridiculous. "Well, apparently they wanted to tell me last," I wrote back, adding, "after I got on the plane." Not only that, but I didn't know what my injury was, or how long I could expect to be out, or if there was any kind of treatment I might actually need. If I had any remaining doubt, it was clear that WWE did not care about me as a person. Bray Wyatt was right. We're just fucking meat to them. I thought about our ranch in Oregon, the land where our now 300-head herd of Wagyu grazed on the land we were healing together, where herds of antelope passed through and mule deer made their home. Geese and blue herons moved into our ponds. We were being treated worse than I treated meat. While being injured would keep me out of the ring, they wanted me to be there so they could film a segment where I pretended to get hurt so they could work it into the storyline. My radius, I would find out only after a series of phone calls and text messages, showed a hairline fracture. While I was confident I could wrestle with it, I was told it was too much of a liability to let me wrestle injured. "When can I return?" I asked Heyman. "It's up to Bruce," he said, "and medical." In that order. That night, as I lay in my hotel room, staring up at a giant white plaster lion head over my bed, I asked myself a question I had never asked myself before. Is it worth it? I had only ever focused on a goal. I had never really thought about the cost because I had always been willing to sacrifice everything in pursuit of achievement. Everything had a different meaning now, and she was at home, 3,000 miles away, wondering where her mama was. A week before WrestleMania, I was cleared to return to limited physicality. They gave us just 8 minutes for a match featuring 8 women. My first run, no one mentioned time to me as a factor in any performance. I was so green I could barely remember the assembled last-minute choreography, let alone how to hit times. But now, the increased pressure of hitting our time hung like a sword over the heads of the women in the locker room. I watched the 7 other women in my match rushed through the choreography. I was only permitted to sneak in and do an armbar finish on Shotzi at the very end. The crowd erupted in boos. That's some real heat, at least, I thought to myself. Heat being the term for hate you get as a heel. The night before at WrestleMania, Rhea and Charlotte went over their allotted time by 20 minutes, putting on arguably the best match of the week-long event. There were some murmurs backstage that it was disrespectful of the main event, a men's tag title match. But I thought it was badass that they took the time to tell their story to the fullest and stole the show. In fact, when they were told to wrap it up so the men after them could perform in front of a fresher crowd, Charlotte and Rhea just kept going like the bosses they were. Instead of running backstage when ordered to do so, they took a stand. I admired them for putting their collective foot down. I wished I was as brave as they were. They gave me hope. I was leaving the shit show behind, but at least I was leaving it in good hands. But their act of defiance wouldn't be without repercussions. After Rhea won the title, despite being the most over, fan favorite woman in the company, she was only allowed to defend her title twice over 5 months. Instead, she spent most of her time escorting the men in her faction Judgment Day to and from the ring like a 1990s valet instead of wrestling herself. The message to the women was clear. If you take time from the men, even if you're the hottest name in the company will make sure to take even more time from you. After our light-speed fatal four-way, I stood in the white-painted concrete tunnels that connected backstage to the football field converted into the WrestleMania floor. It had been 3 months since I sat across from Triple H in Tampa. Shaina and I had won, but I felt defeated. I stood there, still in my spandex fight shorts and sports bra, listening to the crowd cheer for the match after ours. It was my first time performing at the state-of-the-art SoFi Stadium in my hometown, where I hoped for years to create a match that was unforgettable. Instead, I shuffled backstage, already forgotten. A Hall of Fame caliber wrestler from an era before mine walked past me. "Hey there," he said, giving me a hug. I gave a weak nod. "What's up?" he asked. While WWE requires acting in the ring, I am horrible at hiding my emotions in real life. "I'm just so disappointed," I said. "I wanted to do something great." My voice trailed off. He looked at me with the rare expression of someone who understood. "Look around," he gestured. "None of this is real. None of it actually matters. It's a whole bunch of people playing make-believe. It's changed, man. It used to be 2 guys out there going at it, knowing that it was fake, laughing about these fucking marks, wrestling fans, eating it up. Everybody used to know it was a work, scripted fiction. But now they've all bought the con. They're not just working the crowd, they're working themselves too." He laughed. He gestured toward the invisible crowd, reacting to a match on the other side of the arena walls. "Don't let it get to you. These people, the wrestlers, the fans. At the end of the day, they're all just a bunch of fucking nerds." He gave me a heavy pat on the back you'd give a toddler you just picked up after a fall, then continued down the hall. His words hit me like a much-needed chop to the chest. He was right. Why was I letting this get to me? WWE was a scripted show about a fictional wrestling organization. At best, we were only moderately entertaining people, and yet I had let myself become almost consumed about it. The rhinestones, the dramatic makeup, the oversized cheetah print coats, the declarations of being the greatest ever, the cheers of the crowd. Applause is a hell of a drug, and I had become an addict, but none of it was real. More than that, none of it mattered. I had made my way back to the bus, but hesitated outside the door. Snoop Dogg's bus was right next to mine. I pivoted toward the green glowing light. The security guard clocked my approach. Oh, he's gonna want to see you. The security dipped into the bus, then ushered me in. Snoop Dogg sat behind a small table in the bus, with a line of pre-rolled fatties in front of him, like a king ready to receive guests. He smiled. Rhonda. He welcomed me in his iconic relaxed tone. Hey, Snoop. I said like I wasn't fangirling harder than I ever had in my entire life inside my head. I'd be honored to burn one with you. He chose the fattest roll in his lineup and lit it. You know, everyone says I'm the guy that they want to smoke with. He said. He took a rip, held it in. But I got a list of people I want to smoke with too. He handed me the lit joint. And little mama, you're on my list. As I took a much-needed fat rip at the end of a long day, I watched a shredded, oiled, spray-tanned wrestler dab at his eyeliner in the reflection of the bus window. I laughed to myself. Fucking nerds. 20. With the satisfaction I was getting from wrestling on a significant decline, my mind started to wander. I kept my anxieties at bay by diving back into screenwriting again, directing my thoughts to plot holes, dialogue, character relationships, how to show would not tell, themes I wanted to get across. In the years since writing my first screenplay in 11 hours, I learned how to format and structure, yet I doubted anything I wrote would ever be made. Risk-averse studios would never take a chance on me, but the document itself gave me so much satisfaction that I stopped caring if I ever made any of these movies. Then one day, it hit me. The script that had started it all, now titled What to Expect When Expecting the Unexpected, would be a badass graphic novel. Braced for rejection, I started contacting publishers. During the WWE mandated month off to recover from my fractured elbow, the opportunity to go to Mars presented itself. Technically, it was a remote mining town in the Australian outback called Coober Pedy, chosen because of its resemblance to the Red Planet. It was for a show called Stars on Mars, basically Celebrity Big Brother meets Survivor on Mars. It seemed so ridiculous at first that I turned it down. After The Ultimate Fighter, I had sworn off reality shows. However, I was intrigued when the producers reached back out, emphasizing the Mars and survivalist aspects. I'm a big space nerd. I had held my breath for a month, hoping for the success of the James Webb Telescope launch. The show doubled its offer, sealing the deal. But so help me God, if I showed up in the Australian outback and Misha Tate walked in, I was fucking out. The first morning of filming, I was nervous and excited as I waited for the simulated airlock to open. I had no idea who or what to expect. Over the next hour, 11 other celebronauts arrived. We were, by casting design, a group that otherwise would have never crossed paths. Looking around the pseudo-space station's mix of athletes, reality stars, and entertainment industry folks, I realized the only way to come out of this experience unscathed was to give everyone a chance. I had less than flattering preconceived notions when it came to stars of the Real Housewives franchise, like my castmate Portia Williams, and even less respect for those making a living off the series spin-offs like Tom Schwartz. But sitting in a fake space kitchen and talking to them showed me how self-righteous resentment had crept into my psyche. Instead of putting them in a box and blowing them off like I would have done on Earth, I forged friendships that would transcend imaginary space. Every member of the group was a joy to be around. It was an unforgettable experience even apart from all the space nerdy goodness. I did football drills with NFL players Richard Sherman and Marshawn Lynch, did figure skating jumps with Olympian Adam Rippon, played basketball with NBA Hall of Famer Paul Pierce, joked with comedian Natasha Leggero, ate food prepared by Iron Chef Kat Cora, and stationary biked with Lance Armstrong. I wrestled everyone. I realized how much I had been in my own way. Before Mars, if you'd asked me about Lance Armstrong, the most notorious doper in sports history, I would have said, fuck that cheater. He's dead to me. But getting to know him as we worked out alongside each other in the Habs gym reminded me we are more than our worst day or worst decision. A quote from Nanny, my Venezuelan great-grandma, came to mind. Of all the crazy things people do, of all the unimaginable decisions they make, it was the best they could think of to do at the time. That doesn't mean there shouldn't be consequences, but you don't forgive people for them. You forgive them for you. There were certainly times where, by the current standard, I should have been canceled. But I believe I'm a good person, capable of doing some dumb shit at times. If I want people to give me that kind of leeway, I have to be willing to give it to others. My last night, we sat around the table like a family, laughing, joking, refilling our wine. It was one of those moments that you savor as it happens because you know that you will never all be together like that again. I went to bed on my little Martian cot one last time with the biggest smile on my face. I had signed onto the show because it was an opportunity to live out my space geekiness without needing to leave the atmosphere in a little rocket shaped like a penis. But stars on Mars turned out to be that breath of fresh air that I didn't even know that I needed. When we first arrived on Mars, everyone laughed at the idea of pretending we were on Mars, with its jargon of days as souls and the set as the hab, refusing to take it seriously. By Sol 10, I watched these same people with no real interest in space debate who should be mission commander like they were electing the next president. Accepting a new reality when you're so immersed isn't a personality flaw, but a human survival trait. I marvel at how adaptable we as people are, but find it equally terrifying how malleable we are. I would have stayed longer, but I missed my baby so much it felt like a knot in my chest. My medical suspension was over. Shaina and I had a title to win. SummerSlam was edging closer. I volunteered myself to be jettisoned out of the make-believe airlock into the vastness of space / the outback and back to Los Angeles. 2 days later, just in time for Mother's Day, which I swore to myself I wouldn't miss, Poe and I were on a plane heading to North Carolina. We hadn't even reached cruising altitude when my baby turned toddler decided she was fucking done. If you have ever been on a plane with a toddler who decides they are done, you know there is nothing you can do to resolve the situation. It's basically like throwing yourself on a tiny living grenade and just hoping that you're able to shield the people around you from the worst of the explosion. She screamed, she cried, she flailed, she kicked, catching my assistant Jen, who was sitting next to us, in the face. Jen's nose started bleeding. 2 rows behind us, The Miz, another WWE star and father of 2, who happened to be on my flight, gave me a quick look of parental empathy mixed with relief that it wasn't him. My eyes welled with tears. This is the worst fucking Mother's Day ever, I thought for the second year in a row. I should have stayed on Mars. But as I tried to pin a small person with surprising strength into our shared airplane seat, I didn't have time to wallow. I'm going back to finish what I started, I told myself, wiping away tears. One of my closest friends is waiting for me, and we're going to win the tag team titles. Liv stood, staring up at the TV. I'm going to ask them, she said. Don't ask them, I said. Liv smiled a huge Liv smile. Excuse me? She said to the bartender, gesturing up at the TV over the bar that was playing Royal Rumble from 2014. Do you think you can change it to Money in the Bank? Like the one that just happened? The one we were in? She pointed to us, innocently tilting her head to the side in a way that made it almost impossible for anyone to say no to her. I flushed red. I also wanted to watch our match again, but was too embarrassed to be caught watching myself in public. Liv, Raquel, and Shaina laughed at my awkwardness. We were standing in Jimmy's Seafood, a dark brick seafood restaurant / sports bar in Baltimore. Jimmy's was well known among wrestlers, as Jimmy himself kept the place open late just for us whenever a show happened to be passing through Maryland. The bartender messed with the remote for a few seconds. And then there we were. We stood there, staring up at ourselves. Just 2 days before, but a literal ocean away in London. Raquel and Liv had faced off against Shaina and me for our tag team titles. We were the overwhelming odds-on favorite to win, Yes, they actually let people bet real money on fake wrestling. Then it happened. Liv was down on the mat, scooting back into the corner. I started slapping my shoulders, moving toward her, indicating that there was nowhere she could go and nothing she could do. Then Shaina, my teammate, one of my best and oldest friends, ran up from my blind spot, elbowing me from behind and knocking me to the ground. Just like me in the ring, the crowd never saw it coming. I rolled to my back, trying to understand what had happened. But before it could register, Shaina was on top of me, pummeling me as I tried to protect myself. Shaina grabbed me by the hair, catching me in a choke. Liv watched stunned as Shaina tightened her hold. It was the biggest pop of the show. They were celebrating my defeat, the betrayal of my best friend, my dramatic et tu brute moment. I let my body go limp. Shaina threw me to the ground and walked out of the ring. Seeing opportunity, Raquel hit me with her finisher. Liv pounced. I cartwheeled over my elbows, acing the spike DDT cell I made a point to master after the botch with Shotzi. Liv then pinned me for the count of 3. She and Raquel celebrated their tag team title win in the ring as I staggered back through the curtain into Gorilla. Our tag team championship run had been short but sweet. Every match exceeded expectations despite the limits we were working within. Producers were even admitting they should have let me and Shaina tag a long time ago. Now, our run met its bittersweet end. Afterward, I threw myself around her for a hug in the depths of the O2 arena. I turned to the match producer. Time? I asked. Exactly 12 minutes, including entrances, he said. Pros. You are fucking pros. Less than 24 hours earlier, Liv, Raquel, Shaina, and I had been rolling around in the ring at the now largely unused UK WWE Performance Center. There was just one not insignificant detail that we needed to be able to shore up our plans: how much time we had for the match. I asked for 20. Our producer said in a tone that indicated there was no way we were getting 20 minutes. When it came to women's matches, asking for time was very different from getting time. We spent the better part of the next 3 hours mapping things out while waiting to find out how long we might actually get. I'd planned for 15, the producer said after checking his phone for the 15th time. Still no reply. It might change though, he cautioned, and then you have to factor in walkout time. Forget walking out, I said. We'll run. All 4 of us women nodded in solidarity. The good news was we were slated to be the first segment. That meant it would be impossible for any match before us to run over and for our time to be cut further as a result. Pay-per-views aren't subject to the confines of live network broadcast, but production tries to stay on schedule to keep the audience's energy up and the event from running too long. Running over was a common justification when creative made last-minute cuts to match time. I arrived at the arena the next morning for a final run-through. Shaina knocked on my dressing room door. It was small, a maybe 6-foot by 10-foot space in which was crammed a small black love seat, a folding table, and a couple of metal folding chairs. My team was so squeezed in that Jen was sitting in the closet. "Please come in," I said with dramatic flourish. Shaina looked around as if assessing the room for emergency exits. "It's cozy," I said in my best realtor trying to sell you voice. "So," she started in a tone that meant, "This is fucked up, but please stay calm." It was a tone she had used a lot on me over the last few months. Apparently, London has very strict noise restrictions, and it's hard stop at 11 p.m. or else there's a fine. I rolled my eyes. Whatever the fine was, I was sure as a multi-billion-dollar company, WWE would be able to cover it. Also, Shaina added, "We're second now." "Second?" I said. "And we've got 12 minutes. "Just 12? I asked. 12 minutes, I've been told, as long as the men's ladder match, which is now before us, doesn't go too long," she said, grimacing. We exchanged a knowing look. In our heads, We could hear the latter segment producer talking to the guys. So we've got 20 minutes, but the good news is we're now right before the ladies, so if it goes over, we'll just take the time from them. Together, we headed out to the ring to cut 20% of the match. We tore down the house anyway. I was still on a high the next morning, from the match and a couple of gummies, as my car pulled up to the airport. It felt like, for once, everything was coming together. My second stint in WWE might not have been a perfect run, but it could at least have a perfect ending. Initially, I was supposed to fly directly home from London, but the day before we left, Jen relayed word that they wanted me for Raw that Monday. I found myself heading to Baltimore. From a storytelling perspective, it made sense. Whenever there's a dramatic turn that makes millions of jaws drop around the world, everyone wants to know why. We had captured people's attention. It was just what we needed to build to SummerSlam. Sitting next to Shaina as we flew over the Atlantic Ocean, we could hardly believe it was finally happening. This dream that we had shared before any of it seemed possible, now it was on the verge of coming true. In between playing Zelda on my Switch, I drafted up the promo I planned to cut the next night on TV. Why, I would ask, just like the entire WWE universe was asking. The fans, who were just as sick of me as I was of the WWE organization, would pop huge for Shaina. Nothing would make me prouder. Heyman sent me Creative's plan the next morning. It was: 2 other wrestlers will be giving a backstage interview. In the background, Shaina walks into the women's locker room. A few seconds later, Ronda walks across the background. We hear shouting from the locker room. Ronda storms out. What the actual fuck? I said aloud as I read and reread Heyman's message. This had to be a joke. Seth Rollins was slated for 2 entire segments in the ring to cut a promo by himself. The Bloodline had been allotted an entire segment for a video recap of their Money in the Bank match and the lead up to it. Not a single one of them was even in the building. I called Paul. Why am I even here? I asked. It's a starting point, he said diplomatically. It's an insult, I said. Well, what do you want to do? He asked. It's open to negotiation. Good, I said, because I'll walk out of this building before we do that backstage bullshit. Like I said, just a starting point, Paul said. How do you see it then? Heyman was great at getting me from ranting to working in quick order. Okay, here's what we're going to do. A few hours later, Shaina and I came face to face in front of the fans as she unleashed a verbal tirade at me, perhaps even more brutal than her physical attack in London. She was done, she declared. Done being compared to me, done living in my shadow, done pretending that we were equals when she was so much better than me. She was sorry, she said. Sorry she ever met me. Sorry to the fans for the role she played bringing me into the WWE. It was the grains of truth that made the confrontation feel believable. The crowd ate it up. They were behind Shaina like never before. Wrestlers trickled into Jimmy's after the show. Liv and Raquel were there when I arrived. We were smoking a joint on the patio when we saw Bruce Pritchard coming up the patio stairs with several other suits. Put it out, Liv blurted in a loud whisper like a high schooler caught smoking after class by passing faculty. We nodded silent hellos as the executives continued inside and watched them sit right next to our table on the other side of the glass windows. Let's just stay out here, I suggested. Our drinks and bags were inside, but we came out to talk shit about upper management, not sit next to them. Bro, that's so rude. Liv laughed. We can't just pick up and move when they show up. She wasn't wrong. I just didn't care. I followed the others back inside. The restaurant was so loud we could barely hear each other across the table, let alone have to worry about being overheard as we vented our frustrations. I leaned back in my chair. Shaina, Liv, Raquel, and I reveled in the rare win for everyone. This weekend was by far the most fun I'd ever had in that ring, second only to my Mania debut. I'd had an amazing weekend working with some of my favorite women in the company, and now we get to smoke a joint, have a drink, and watch our match while talking shit and eating hot wings? It was pretty close to heaven. This is why I do this, I thought. Then, just as we were leaving, When I let my guard down to give people awkward barstool hugs goodbye, Pritchard emerged from the shadows. He said he'd been hoping to catch us. I tried to force a smile. The corners of my mouth twitched from the effort. The night show had been one of the very few nights that neither Triple H nor Vince had been on site. Triple H was on vacation. I assumed Vince was deep inside the Misty Mountains, hoarding the Ring of Power, either that or a brothel. That had meant that Pritchard had been overseeing the show. Of course, he had no real power, which is why they had left him in charge. There were, Pritchard explained, 2 different phones that he had on the table behind the monitor. One was to Vince, and one was to Triple H. I wanted to ask why it couldn't just be one phone that both of them could call, but didn't want to engage him in conversation. If either of them goes off during the show, it's always because something bad is happening, he explained. When your segment happened, they both went off at once. He paused for dramatic effect, as if telling a spooky story. I was really anxious about what they were going to say, he continued, but they both said the exact same thing, that your segment was fucking awesome. He beamed proudly like he had some part in it. It took every ounce of self-restraint I had to not scoff and say, "Psh, well, we're trying our best to accommodate you." Instead, the 4 of us staged our exits from Jimmy's so that the kid outside with his dad trying to get autographs wouldn't see we were all friends and have the fantasy ruined. I got in the car back to the hotel, anxious to get home after a week on the road with my family, but satisfied. I looked down at my phone. It was a text from my production company partner, Jason. Dude, AWA Comics loved your script. They want to make you an offer. I punched the air a few times. Fuck yeah, I thought. Could this weekend get any goddamn better? And, for the first time in a long time, I was excited for what lay ahead. Conclusion. I walked up the stone steps, pushed the brightly colored serape back from over the doorway of the dome structure, and ducked through to enter. My eyes adjusted to the dim, diffused lighting of the ceremonial Mexican sweat lodge. I sat down, leaning my back against the clay wall. The warmth radiated through my skin and into my muscles. I rolled my shoulders back and breathed in the fragrant steam. This is exactly what I needed, I said. Half an hour earlier, I had been headed to the gym at my hotel in Mexico City with the sole intention of getting in a quick workout on the elliptical machine. I had agreed to do one last set of live shows to prepare for SummerSlam, and it just so happened to be on the Mexico tour loop, taking us to Mexico City and Monterrey for 2 shows in 2 days. The elevator stopped on the way down, and Santos Escobar walked in. Escobar had moved up from NXT less than a year prior, and while we had briefly been on SmackDown at the same time, we'd never really crossed paths. When I wasn't in the women's locker room, I was chasing my baby around the bus. We both did that crazy running into you here double take, even though it shouldn't have been surprising as everyone on the tour was staying in the same hotel. Jim? He asked. I nodded. Me too, he said. Then added, well, first the gym, then, do you know what a temazcal is? I know what mezcal is, I said. He laughed. The elevator door opened. Come, I'll show you, he said. We walked past the fitness center entrance, but instead of turning left, went right. There, in what seemed like the quiet, tranquil area of a spa reception room, was a rounded structure that looked to be made of concrete, brick, and clay. It was painted the faintest pink, with the opening covered in a traditional striped Mexican blanket with shades of red, black, and bluish gray. It's traditional, he explained. It's supposed to be spiritual, like being in a womb from the earth. It's good for detox. This is the only one in the whole city. Have you done it? I asked. He shook his head. I've wanted to. However, I have it reserved in 30 minutes, if you want to join me, he said. You're asking me if I want to join you in a traditional ceremonial earth womb that's only located in one spot in Mexico City and we just happen to be here? Yes, I said enthusiastically. Between judo, fighting, and wrestling, I had spent much of my life traveling the world, but seeing little of it and even less time appreciating it. I have a series of photos of me posed in front of scenic locations, the Acropolis in Athens from the 2004 Olympics, the pyramids in Egypt from the 2005 World Championships, the Great Wall in China at the 2008 Olympics, the Sydney Opera House promoting my UFC fight in 2015, the Eiffel Tower during a WWE live tour in 2018, but they're just images, not memories. Quick social media snapshots taken so I could say, I was here, but without actually being in the moment. With tournaments to win and matches to put together, I couldn't spare the time. I had been more focused on gathering the appearance of happiness than I was on actually being happy. I was trying to change that. The evening before, my sister Maria and I had wandered through the streets of Mexico City, strolling through its Parque Lincoln, ducking into a restaurant serving Oaxacan food just before a downpour. It's the kind of thing that I would never have done before. For a long time, everywhere I went seemed to spark a near riot, but that was only a small part of it. The real reason was that I was so singularly focused on achieving success that I felt if I took 1 second to focus on anything else, that 1 second could be the difference between greatness and failure. For more than half of my life, I had been willing to give everything up to achieve just one thing. I had missed out on a lot of living in the process. A man in a polo shirt, who did not look anything like the shaman pictured on the promotional image of the Temezcal over the wellness center desk, led us into the room with the sweat lodge. He said something about the lodge and the process. At least I assume that's what he was saying since it was all in Spanish. Then poured herb-infused water on the hot rocks in the center of the room, nodded his head, and walked out. Sorry, what is your name? I asked. Escobar looked confused. Like your actual name, I said. I'm guessing your parents didn't name you Santos Escobar, although if they did, they were basically setting you up to be a wrestler. Jorge, he said. Jorge Luis. He was, however, born into pro wrestling. In Mexico, perhaps even more than in WWE, professional wrestling is a family affair. The kind of thing that is passed down, the way people come from a family of doctors or lawyers. His father, he explained, had been a professional wrestler. His uncle was a wrestler. His cousin is a wrestler. I've been training for 25 years, he said, ever since I was 14 years old. That's a long time in this business, I said. He nodded, then wiped the sweat from his face. I love it, but sometimes I feel like I'm chasing the dragon, he said. Do you know what I mean? I understood exactly what he meant. To be forever in pursuit of a level of greatness that is always just beyond reach. To believe that if you just get to that point, if you just catch the dragon, if you just win the next thing, if you just break down this next barrier, if you just, that everything will be perfect, that it will be enough. I was convinced of that for a long time. Only, no matter what I had achieved, it was never enough. I dangled a promise of, this will be the thing that makes it all worthwhile, in front of myself like a carrot, but instead of ever finding happiness, I only felt more and more unfulfilled. No matter how many symbols of happiness I collected, they never added up to the real thing. There was never going to come a point, no matter how incredible the achievement, where I could say, okay, I did it, and just be content in the afterglow forever. I needed to be happy with who I am and the life I have, not the things I did. One of the hardest decisions for many athletes and wrestlers is to know when to hang it up. There are far too many examples of those who stayed beyond their prime because they couldn't bear to give up on the dragon, because they just needed one more win, because they couldn't imagine life without the applause, because they didn't know who they were if they weren't this one thing. With my departure from WWE rapidly approaching, I expected to feel something, but I hadn't expected it to simply be relief. I'm one of the lucky ones. Many wrestlers have so few options, they don't even have the option of walking away. They're forced to keep going until their body falls apart. It is the only skill some of them have ever had, the only place they have status. For others, it's the only world they had ever known. There are those for whom it is a place to get in, make money, and get out. For me, it was a fun world to visit, but it wasn't where I was truly meant to be. I wasn't a native. I was a tourist. There was some truth to the Ronda Go Home signs. This wasn't my home. I enjoyed the escape from reality, but I knew this was the Matrix. I held the red pill in my hand, savoring the final moments of alternate reality before I woke myself up. Now, we had just a matter of weeks between Money in the Bank and SummerSlam to build up excitement around the match, and there would be limited TV time given to us to do it. As I lamented the situation, Shaina quoted Triple H from a conversation the two of them had years before. He told her, "We sell stories, not minutes." "Really?" I asked. "Because one guy's walkout alone is 8 minutes. What's the story behind that?" I waited a beat. Shaina shrugged. "I'm just saying there's a reason the Iliad's more than 5 pages. Shaina and I wanted to create a match that had never been seen. We wanted to blur the line of real and make-believe, to leverage the truth of our friendship and the fight skills that had brought us into the MMA spotlight, brought us together in the UFC, and paved the way for both of us to transition into WWE. To not capitalize on our fight history would be a missed opportunity. Online, the fans were already speculating about it. I got a text from Paul Heyman. It read, "They want to do a fight pit match." I was hesitant. The WWE fight pit looked like a UFC octagon birthday cake. That is, a cage topped with a platform with another cage around that. Our match was supposed to be completely believable. Adding climbing up fences ran the risk of pushing it from holy shit to hokey. "Just wait a second," Shaina said. She pulled out her phone and searched up a fight pit match from NXT. It was awesome. With the NXT fight pit, the upper level was rimmed by guardrails instead of a second fence. The railings added a danger of falling from 8 to 10 feet up. In my mind, I saw the moment play out. I would almost fall from the second level, but catch myself dangling over the edge. In a moment drawn from the Lion King, I would beg Shaina to help me up. She'd hesitate. I'd cry for help. She'd pull me up, only then to snatch me in her rear naked choke, dangling over the edge toward the crowd. It was visual. It was dramatic. It was the perfect ending to my WWE career. "Can we use the NXT fight pit with guardrails?" I asked Heyman. "That fight pit's not safe," Heyman told me. "It's basically held together by scotch tape." "It was safe enough to use at least twice before," I said. "How about a rounds match?" Shaina suggested. A rounds match draws from the combat sports concept of having rounds with breaks in between as opposed to WWE's one-round format. NXT currently had a title just for a rounds format. "People won't get it," came the reply. "Tell Vince if we did a rounds match, we could have blonde ring girls with big tits that hold up a sign and walk around the ring like in a fight," I said. It took Heyman a little longer to shoot that idea down, so I could only assume it was something he thought Vince might at least take into consideration. We had less than an hour before we had to film our segment in which Shaina was going to set the conditions for our SummerSlam match. "I don't even know what I'm going to say," she said. "We'll leave it vague," Heyman said. "You can say, 'I challenge you to a fight. Not a match, but a fight.'" "Yeah," I added, "a fight, but without a cage, or rounds, or blood, or probably even hitting. We'll call it a fight, but it will really just be a regular wrestling match." "You can wear gloves," Heyman said. "Sorry," I clarified. "A regular wrestling match with gloves." 12 days later, after WWE rescinded their offer for a fight pit match because of logistics, I stood backstage for the final time, waiting for bad reputation to usher me out. Shaina pulled me in for a hug. "I fucking love you," she said. "Thank you for everything." "I fucking love you too. Thank you." I held her out at arm's length so I could look her in the eye. I know I don't say it enough, but thank you. Joan Jett's guitar started to blare through the speakers. It was my cue. Hey, Rowdy, Shaina said, and I turned my head to look back. Don't fuck up. I gave her a wink and pushed through the curtain. I was met by a chorus of boos as I made my way to the ring after a high-flying men's battle royale that had the crowd riveted. They hadn't done us any favors with our placement on the card, but I would have expected nothing less. This time, I didn't care. I stepped into the ring. For the first time in my career, it wasn't about entertaining the audience. It wasn't about leading a revolution. It wasn't about striving for greatness. It was just about us. It was just for us. Just like we had first dreamed about years ago. Shayna's black ear was a subtle nod to Horus the Portrayer from Warhammer 40K. Her hair was braided in cornrows the way she'd worn it for MMA fights. In a throwback to my fight days, my gear mimicked sponsors' advertisements. My shorts covered in logos from phony businesses that reflected my love of Dragon Ball Z. The print was so small it was impossible for the crowd to see, but it wasn't for them. I wore my favorite red Fairtex MMA gloves. The Strikeforce ones I'd worn when I beat Sarah Kaufman in my last fight before signing with the UFC. The legendary Strikeforce S covered in red tape. We met in the middle, and I reached out my hands to touch gloves. I was never the type to offer my gloves first, but I did for her. She left me hanging as I was known to do to bitches I don't like. The match itself drew upon Shaina and my favorite moments in MMA. References a fraction of the people in the stadium would get. It was our love letter to MMA written in the language of pro wrestling. There was a wink to Anderson Silva's premature knockout celebration, a nod to Boss Root and Frank Shamrock trading punches from a double ankle lock. We added a reference to my liver shot knockout against Sarah McMahon. We slipped in my flying armbar from my MMA professional debut against Sarah D'Alio. Hell, we even hailed my own head kick knockout. The entire match was an MMA Easter egg hunt, and only we knew where the eggs were hidden. The crowd watched, unsure what to do as we wailed on each other. Nothing we did invited their participation. There were no moments where it was clear fans were supposed to boo, no moves that telegraphed they were supposed to cheer. There was no taking turns punching each other on top of the turnbuckle and letting the crowd count to 10. No holds for applause. We took out almost everything that looked like a pro wrestling move, throwing it back to the sport that had brought us to this point. My step-up knee was the only move you wouldn't see in a real MMA fight, but Shaina was crazy enough to turn into the knee on purpose, taking it straight to the face. She was probably hoping to get color, bleed for the sake of raising the stakes of the match, but the skin didn't break, and her eyes swelled immediately instead. For a second, I was worried she was really hurt. Then she gave me the Iggy, wrestling for sign that she was okay. Keeping a straight face, I laughed to myself. She was so damn good she fooled me too. We swung at each other in the middle of the ring, pulling our punches ever so slightly and aiming for each other's foreheads. Every second slowed down, chopped into 1,000 pieces I could examine individually, the way it did when I fought. I missed that feeling. In that moment, in the ring, every single thing made sense. Every motion anticipated and capitalized on, not because it was scripted, but because it wasn't. Shaina and I flowed from one spot to the next because we know how to fight, how to make it real, how to make it make sense. For the very last time, I loved every second of it. Somewhere in the crowd, I heard rumblings of, "This is boring," but the fans weren't able to sync up from around the stadium, and the chant died. I didn't even care. I expected the fans weren't going to understand. They weren't going to appreciate it. If anything, making them sit through it was my last fuck you to them and the company. But it was the match that we wanted it to be. It was a match that I was proud of. That's all that mattered. From the corner of my eye, in the second row, I locked eyes with Poe. It was a moment she would never remember, and a moment I will never forget. After a series of counters, Shaina wrapped her arm around my neck in her now infamous rear naked choke. I wrenched on her injured arm, but she kept squeezing until she laid me unconscious in the ring. For the first time in my WWE career, I had truly lost clean. The crowd booed and jeered at me as I walked away from Shaina, celebrating in the ring with my hands on my hips and my head down. As I headed toward backstage, I wanted so badly to look back, to cheer for her right along with the fans as she raised her arms victoriously. At long last, my creed of, I don't give a damn about my reputation, wasn't something I hoped for, but lived by. I paused for a second before passing through the curtain separating the stadium floor with its spotlights, jumbotrons, fireworks, from its backstage concrete hallways, fluorescent lighting, and TV monitors. It was my final walk away from WWE, from the spotlight. It wasn't as bittersweet as I expected it would be. In that moment, all I felt was free. Backstage, Trav scooped me up into his arms. I walked out of the building, one arm around my husband, my daughter in the other. The roar of the crowd faded in the distance. I had lost, and I had never been happier. I hadn't done everything I set out to, but in the end, I had done what it turned out that I needed to do. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had done enough. As I left WWE, I thought about the words Trav had said to me as I had left my final UFC fight. I am so much more than a fighter. I am so much more than a pro wrestler, than a mother, than a wife, than an actress, than a writer, than a daughter. There is an entire world out there of so much more that I haven't even started to tackle. We are so much more than the tiny boxes we put ourselves in or allow ourselves to be put in. So much more than the labels that we feel forced to use to identify who we are. We are so much more than our jobs, so much more than our worst days, than our best days, than any single moment. We are not merely the things we have done in the past or the things we might achieve in the future. The present was everything I wanted it to be, and it was finally enough. I never won the Olympics in judo like I always hoped, but I learned how to be an absolute badass who could throw down and armbar anyone on earth trying. I never retired undefeated from UFC, but changed the world, made a small fortune, and found the love of my life trying. Maybe I'll never make the martial art films of my dreams, but I discovered a love of pro wrestling, screenwriting, and graphic novels trying. And now I'm walking away from what could have been a Hall of Fame WWE career. But I wouldn't have it any other way, because it's impossible to get everything you ever want in life. But trying is the best part anyway.
All right. Well, that is the conclusion of the audiobook of Ronda Rousey, Our Fight, and Memoir Book, Audio 2024. As I stated earlier, this was the last part of the audiobook, and it will be a little over 2 hours. And we're 2 hours and 19 minutes in. Ronda Rousey was explaining her final run in WWE following the birth of her daughter. and she had her last match at SummerSlam 2023. That was against Shaina Baszler, and I know she discussed her very, 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 very. She was upset and did not agree with a lot of how WWE did business as far as creative and everything else went. But a lot of interesting things I did learn following this last part of the audiobook. I did not know that Rhea Ripley, the current women's champion, that despite her great performance with Charlotte Flair at WrestleMania 39, that even though they went over several minutes after being advised not to, that she was punished by not defending her title the first first couple months, I believe, that Ronda explained, and the release of Aaliyah, you know, that went down that way. So it was several things that I didn't learn beforehand that she explained, and I always wonder why some of the things happened the way it did. But other than that, very interesting audiobook. A lot of things to learn about what Ronda says about WWE, not just Vince McMahon and Bruce Pritchard, but also the fellow women wrestlers or superstars as they call it. But definitely something to look forward to. If you guys want to check out more of this audiobook, there's a part 1 and a part 2. And as I stated earlier, if you like more audiobooks, I do have the audiobook of Becky Lynch, who just released her audiobook. That's a very interesting audiobook as well. You guys could check that out as well. I have several parts to that. And that is the new audiobook that she has of Becky Lynch, the average, not your average girl audiobook. But like I said, I do plan on putting more audiobooks. I haven't decided which ones yet, but I will do that at some given point. But other than that, this was a great audiobook. Very interesting to see not just about Ronda Rousey that was in UFC and WWE, but Ronda Rousey, the individual, and her personality and how she do things in life. So I thank you all for coming out, checking out this audiobook. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I have. Soon to videos will pop up for Red Carpet Rain. The first video will be predicting 2024 WWE Draft. The second second video will be WWE WrestleMania 49 2 main event. Until then, it is OUT.